every Monday at 5:30, but due to the coronavirus, obviously we've shut things down. So what I am going to do, as opposed to not giving information and spreading as much information as I can, I'm going to do these classes live now. I have my courtroom family, I'll call it, because we all make mistakes, but I don't hold it against anybody. They are tuning in on Zoom. I have my IG family tuning in on IG. None of the two can see each other, so that's a great thing. And what I'll do at the end of this class, and it'll be a short class, I'll take some questions on the issue of domestic violence because I think it's something very important. I appreciate you all tuning in. Thank you very much. Let me see if I can reset this up here. And we're going to get started. And you have an option. If you are currently coming from the courtroom, I'm going to mute you so that way we don't have to hear any background noise. And of course, if you have any questions, we can do that later. But I am glad that you're here because I can take attendance and that's necessary. All right. So I'm not going to hold you long. We're going to talk about domestic violence. First thing I want to let you know about domestic violence is domestic violence happens, it can happen to anybody. So if you are a victim of domestic violence, there's nothing to be ashamed of. And if you've been in that situation and become a so-called defendant or a person who's committed domestic violence, it's something that you can change from. It's nothing that is a death sentence. That's one thing I talk about in my courtroom all the time. All the mistakes that we make, whether it's domestic violence, assault, theft, whatever it is, you can always come back from it. And that's why I do the program called Finish First, because I truly believe that we can do that. And I truly believe cycle breakers means that you can break any negative cycle that you've had. So that's where we start. So tonight we're talking about domestic violence, and I'm going to go over some of these general propositions on domestic violence. Then there's some comments that are already received on the topic that I'm going to talk about. So where do I start? I had a couple of cases today. That's the easiest way to start. But let's talk about domestic violence and kind of the cycle that it goes through. So this has been kind of something that's been out there for a while about the cycle of violence when it comes to domestic violence. And basically what happens in a relationship, there's this area that's called tension building. And I left it blank because I'm going to fill in some of the blanks. And if you've been in my courtroom or if you've listened to me before, you know my handwriting is not the greatest, so don't hold that against me. So when we talk about tension building in all of these areas, basically you have two sections, right? You have the person who is called the abuser, and then you have the person that's called the victim. And again, excuse my handwriting. So in a tension building phase, what's going on right there? You have nitpicking, right? So what is nitpicking? Nitpicking, and I'm going to go ahead and mute us. Thank you for joining in. Nitpicking is when you find something wrong almost about everything the person does. So maybe it's the meal that they cooked. Maybe it's what they're wearing that day. Maybe I don't want you to go out the house with that. This is an area to be aware of because when the nitpicking begins, we got to look at our relationship and see where is this going. So you have nitpicking, and we're talking about the abuser. The first thing that starts, the nitpicking. Then we talk about affection, right? So on the affection, with an abuser or a person who is building tension in a domestic violence situation, they start withdrawing their affection. So all of a sudden, as opposed to giving you a hug when you ask for a hug or giving you a kiss when you ask for a kiss, they're withdrawing that affection. So that's something else to look for. What else do we have? And I took my notes here. Putting a person down. So that goes beyond the nitpicking, right? So what you have now is you have, you know what, you're always doing this. Or you don't do this good. You can't cook. Or let's talk about women who are doing this to guys. When are you going to get a job? You know, you're lazy like your dad. Whatever the case may be, you go from nitpicking to putting somebody down. And again, the reason we're even talking about this is because people don't realize during this tension building phase, that's why we're getting revved up. And that's when domestic violence can occur. So we have putting down, nitpicking. Let me see what else I have. Criticism, right? So let's talk about that real quick. Same thing, you know, like we said, oh, you can't cook. Or, you know, I don't like the way you do X, Y, and Z. It could be anything, right? It could be a sexual situation. We're talking about intimacy and things like that. We got to be careful because that's building tension in the relationship. That's building how the two of you are going to communicate. here's something that's interesting that people don't think about. When you're going to the tension building, and this may happen again, one of your parties, be careful when they start twisting God's word, right? So they start saying stuff like, well, the Bible says that you should submit to me. And we know that there's a lot more to it than just that, right? But when you have somebody that starts using that against you, you got to be aware of it, because that's building a little bit of tension and it's telling you where the relationship is going. Another one that I put here, cyberstalking. So all of a sudden they're looking at your Instagram page or your Facebook page, and they're asking you, well, why did you put that there? Or who is this person that liked your comment or put a like or put those googly eyes or the heart? Beware of that, because that's another example of somebody starting to build tension. And one other thing I'm going to put here is the silent treatment. So all of a sudden you're talking to your mate, you're trying to get along, you're trying to communicate, and they don't want to talk to you. So they're giving you the silent treatment. That's something else that you want to be aware of, because that's an example of tension building. So these are all the things that a quote unquote abuser will do when tension is building. So now let's move to a victim. How does a victim react in these situations? The first one I have here is eggshells. So the victim starts walking around the house on eggshells. I don't want to say this. I don't want to say that. I don't want to get them too mad. And that's an example of when things are getting bad. When you are in your apartment or when you are in your relationship in your house and you feel that you can't express yourself the way you need to express yourself, now you're walking on eggshells. That's something to be aware of. Give you another one for the victim. Keeping the kids quiet. Now, some of us, we have kids, and it's a challenge to keep kids quiet, right? But I'm talking about in a domestic violence situation. You're walking on eggshells so much to the point where you're like, you know what? Don't go in there and bother daddy. Don't go in there and bother mommy, whatever the case may be. The kids are being kept silent. And again, what we're talking about is domestic violence. We're going to talk about several things on these Monday sessions. This is the first one. We're going to keep them going. It'll be a half hour, so I appreciate you and your time. Victims in the domestic violence, when the tension is building, they're keeping the kids silent. They're walking on eggshells, trying to be perfect. So now they're like, you know what? I want to be perfect for them. I want to nurture, and I want to agree on everything. So again, what you're doing now, the victim, whether it's a male or a female, doesn't want the relationship to go bad. They don't want you to get upset. So they're making sure that they agree with you. Okay, you're right, honey, you're right. But that's the tension building. So you have to be aware in these relationships, whether you're male or female, is there tension building in your relationship that can go to the next level? Because the next level is when everything explodes. That's the explosion. So let's talk about what happens in this explosion area. So we come from the standpoint of the abuser, right? This is where domestic violence occurs. And the great thing about this topic, if you are not a victim of domestic violence right now, believe me, you may know one. Because the statistics are 1 out of every 4 women have experienced domestic violence, and 1 out of every 7 men have experienced some type of domestic violence. So whether you realize it or not, somebody you know is going through this. And the most important part about domestic violence is that if you are going through it, I understand from all these years, think about it, I've been doing this as a judge for 9 years. I've been in this business for 19 years. What I know is victims suffer in silence. You don't go out to the club and every time you see your best friend from 10 or 20 years ago, like, yeah, what's up, girl? What's up, dude? Yeah, at home, my mate is whooping on me. You know what I mean? Or he slapped me again. We don't talk about that. And it's rightfully so. It's embarrassing. But I want you to know that, one, you're not alone, because the statistics will show that 1 in every 4 women are going through it. 1 in every 7 men are going through it. So you are not alone. But we got to figure out what to do about it, all right? So once we get to the explosion stage, that's when it happens, right? So let me see what I wrote here as my notes here. Explosion. All right, let's get right to it. Hitting, right? Anytime a man or a woman puts their hands on you in a negative way, where they're trying to discipline you or they're angry, that hitting is domestic violence. And let me rewind. Let me rewind for a moment. Domestic violence, statistically speaking, we talked about 1 in 4 and 1 in 7. What I do want to let you know is that the definition of domestic violence is this. It is when you cause physical harm, you cause or attempt to cause physical harm to a family member or an intimate partner. Cause or attempt to cause physical harm to a family member or intimate partner. So what that means, or a household member, let me add that too. When I say family member, household member. So either the person is living with you, that will be domestic violence. Or somehow the two of you have an intimate relationship, whether it is, you're involved intimately, or maybe you have a child together. That would be domestic violence also. So that's the first stage, is getting to the actual definition of domestic violence. So if somebody is hitting you, obviously that is domestic violence, and you've already reached the stage where it is exploded. What's another one? For the domestic violence, we have weapons involved. All right. That's an ugly situation, but it happens. And let me tell you this, you have two situations that happen with weapons. Either you have a person that is actually going to use a weapon on you, or what they do, which is just as bad, is they brandish that weapon and threaten to use it. So basically they show you the gun and they say, look, if you don't do X, Y, and Z, I'm going to do something to you. Or they threaten you in some type of way. Keep in mind, that is far gone. You are from the tension building. You are in an explosion situation. Domestic violence is occurring right now. That's exactly what that means. So, for men and women who care about your mate, because we all do, and I know you all do, when you get to this stage, you are actually experiencing domestic violence. Whether you decide to stay or not, you are in domestic violence. So we have weapons involved. What else do we have? We have pushing. We have grabbing. So that's another thing. It depends on how you grew up, right? Some of us are okay with, well, you know what? He grabbed me and he shook me. Well, grabbing you and shaking you is not okay. It's domestic violence. And let me tell you something. And I mean this from the bottom of my heart. People often say that we've been through different things and we experienced different things. I grew up, as some of you know, in East Cleveland. Went to all the schools here, spent most of my time in East Cleveland, and I live in East Cleveland now, right? So for those of you watching, we all know East Cleveland is just as hood as it gets. And we know violence goes on in our community, but I have never put my hands on a woman to the extent where I'm pushing, shoving, or hitting. And the reason I say that to you right now is because it does not have to happen, and it is not normal. So I don't care if you say you got a dude or a woman from the street dude, or whatever the case, and that's just how they are. No, that's not just how they are. That is a person who is an abuser. You can be a street guy, you can be as hood as they come, but that doesn't mean you have to be an abuser. And if you are a woman who likes a street dude, that's cool. But the street dude is not the type of guy, he doesn't have to be an abuser. That's two different things. Same thing with the man. If you like a lady with a little bit of swag, a little bit of attitude, that's fine. But the moment she starts putting her hands on you, that's not fine. That is domestic violence. All right, so pushing and grabbing. Here's another one that people don't think about. Animal abuse, right? I put animals. So what happens in a domestic violence situation often is they'll realize, you know what? I can't get to him or her this way. I know she loves her dog. I know he loves his dog. So now I'm going to abuse the dog. That is a form of domestic violence. That's where it's getting to the explosion stage, because the next phase is for that person to put their hands on you because they don't think that they can get through to you. So be aware of that. What else do we have? Humiliation. And we're going to talk about imprisonment and destroying property. All right. So humiliation. What is humiliation, right? Humiliation is when you as a man or a woman, you're out with your friends, you're kicking it, whatever the case may be, or you're at home, but you have somebody who constantly tries to put you down, and it's beyond just criticizing you at this point. It's trying to make you feel less than human. So it's when they start cursing at you. You know what? I mean, I'm keeping it real. We're all adults here. You know, you ain't shit. Your mama ain't shit. All that, that's humiliation. And that is a form of domestic violence. Again, you can like a man or a woman with a little spice and a little attitude, but when they start cursing you out and saying you not shit and you man, all that, that's a form of domestic violence where it comes to humiliation. And you don't have to deal with it, and you need to know about it. And I'm telling you guys too, because guys, women, they talk to you like that too, but it's unacceptable. You don't have to settle for that type of woman. I mean, and again, if that's how you guys communicate, you know, I'm not speaking necessarily to that. We just don't want you to end up in a situation where there's a court case involved. That's all I'm saying. All right. Imprisonment. What's imprisonment? Imprisonment is when a guy or girl is telling you, oh, you ain't going nowhere. You can't go to the store. You know, all of that stuff, when they're trying to limit what you can do or monitor what you do, that's domestic violence. And a lot of times when it gets to this point where domestic violence is happening, not only is there imprisonment, but there's isolation. So now they don't want you to call mom and dad. You know, why you on the phone with your sister? Who you telling about our relationship? This between you and me. Whenever you got a man or a woman that's doing that, that's not normal either. You mean, really, we all know to be healthy, think about it. We are in the middle of a pandemic, right? They're saying that we can't go out. We're supposed to stay at home. How many people are feeling kind of weird because you're not able to socialize? So imagine how that man or woman feels when you tell him or her, oh, you can't talk to your mom, or I don't want you talking to your sister. When you get to that point, you're in the middle of domestic violence, so isolation. All right, and destroying property. Destroying property is when you get in the house and all of a sudden they're throwing things around. And I know we get to that point, but that's a form of domestic violence because the point is what you're causing that person is to feel fear. There is a third prong of domestic violence. The first one, remember I told you the definition is cause or attempt to cause physical harm to a household member or family member or household member, right? The other one is basically when you attempt to cause harm recklessly. And then the third level is when you do it by a threat. Now, a third level won't always put you in jail, but when you threaten somebody by damaging property, telling them what you're going to do to them, you know, telling them if you go here and there, I'm going to beat you up or whatever, that's domestic violence. And that'll cause you to be in a courtroom. All right. So we're talking about what the abuser does. Let me move down to the victim, and we got one more section. I'm going to take a couple of questions, and then I'll see you next week. So on the victim end of it, the victim begins to fear for safety. The problem with that is, just like I said in the very beginning, domestic violence, you suffer in silence. So even when you start fearing for your safety, you don't feel comfortable letting people know what's going on. And that's the problem with domestic violence. It becomes a silent sufferer situation. So when you fear for your safety, you know you're in a situation where you need to start getting some answers. How do you get out of this situation? And basically, when we're talking about when it gets to domestic violence, we got to figure out the way out. What's another thing? Trying to calm the person down, right? Trying to calm them down, that don't help. Baby, why don't you relax? Let's chill out. That don't help. Try to reason with the person. That's another thing. It's very hard, but you try to reason with a person. When you're in this situation, most victims don't want to call the police. And I'm going to talk about, again, I have a couple of comments that I got to get to that dealt with whether or not police should be involved in a relationship when there's domestic violence. But that's something that people are doing. All of a sudden, you're trying to reason with the guy or reason with the girl. You know, is this really domestic violence? Can't we work it out? And then the last resort, you call it 911. And that's when it gets bad, because once it gets to 911, here's something that all men and women need to know about domestic violence. Once it gets here and the courts get involved, as a woman or a man, you do not control the environment at that point. You cannot say, I want to drop the charges. You cannot say, I don't want my man or woman to go through that, because it's now the state's case, right? Or it's the city's case. Now, there are things that we can do when it comes to victims. If a victim decides not to come to court and this is something that's so very important, I have the power as a judge to issue a warrant for that victim's arrest. Now, I try not to use that authority because I don't want to further victimize a victim, but I can actually issue a warrant for the victim's arrest. So the point is, once it gets to the point where we're calling 911, the situation doesn't just go away. So we try to get, we're trying to put you in a situation where it's not there. And what happens here? We have physical abuse, you got mental abuse, and you have family abuse. What does family abuse mean? Everybody around you suffers when you're going through domestic violence. Your kids suffer, your cousins suffer, the neighbors, everybody around you. But most importantly, the kids are the biggest victims when there's a family. Because you and I, as an adult, we can decide what we want to do. You can decide, you know what, I don't care. I'm going to stay with this dude. He keeps beating me up, but I'm cool with it. And if that's what you want to do as a lady, that's fine. If that's what you want to do as a guy, that's fine. But the kids, they begin to feel your energy as early as 2 years old or maybe even sooner. So when there's arguing in the house, they know it. When there's fighting in the house, they know it. So you don't want to put your kids in a situation where they have to choose to grow up in that environment, because what they are doing is learning that domestic violence is either okay or just that's what I got to deal with. And that's the last thing you want to do for your child. You want to teach them that. So family situation. All right. Rounding third, heading home, and then we're going to get to these questions, and then I'm going to catch you next week. So our next section is the honeymoon phase, right? So what does that mean for me? That means this is where everybody's trying to make up and act like the domestic violence didn't happen. Sometimes that's good for a relationship. Sometimes it's not. Many times, if you have a man or a woman who put their hands on you or committed domestic violence, they need to go through the system because they need to get the tools so that it doesn't happen again. It's almost like this. A lot of people don't want to press charges, but if you got a man or a woman that's strung out on drugs, your answer is not, you know what, I want to let them work through it. I know they almost died from an overdose, but they're going to be all right. If you care about that person, you want them to get some help. Same thing with domestic violence. If you really care about the person, you want them to get help. You don't want to cover it up. You don't want to put them in a situation where you're just letting them slide through. But that's what happens. So what happens on the honeymoon stage? All right. There's an apology. Baby, I'm sorry. Baby, you know I'm not going to do it again. And let's keep it real. Where did this apology come from? Most of the time, calling from jail, right? Baby, I'm in here. It's terrible in here. I need to get out of jail. What if it happened last night? I don't want the coronavirus. I mean, all these things, and they make sense. But that's what happens. You're going to get an apology because this is the honeymoon stage now. The guy or girl who committed this offense to you, now they want to make up. So they're going to call you with an apology. What's my next one? Begging for forgiveness. So they're not going to just call with an apology. Oh, I'm sorry. Forgiveness comes flowers, romance. You know what? So all of a sudden, all them things you wanted to do, he don't take you out enough, or y'all don't go to the movies no more, or y'all don't go out to the club. Oh, during this phase, it's going to happen for sure. I'm going to take you out. I'm going to buy you flowers. I'm going to buy you that Louis bag. Whatever it is, I promised you, you're going to get it right here because I'm trying to get back in, right? But unfortunately, if you don't work on this issue of domestic violence, it's going to go right. That's why this is a circle. And my theme is being a cycle breaker. This is a cycle. And it happens over and over until right here, you bust that person out the cycle by giving them more tools. All right. So forgiveness. Now, I know this happens and I wish it didn't, but blame. Oh, girl, it was your fault. Why'd you do that to me? Why'd you call that guy? Why'd you write that post? Why'd you email that person? Here's the deal. I don't care what you've done. Nobody has a right to put their hands on you. So keep that in mind. No matter what you've done. You know what? You're a human being. You are a God-given human being What that person needs to do, if they're unsatisfied with what you did, walk away. But that person, that man is not your father. That woman is not your mother. They are not to put their hands on you. And men and women, if you're in a relationship with a woman you got to put your hands on, then it's time for you to walk away. So the bottom line is, don't allow somebody to blame you and say you're the reason why this domestic violence occurred, because you're not. They put their hands on you and there's no excuse. A couple other things I want to mention. Oh, this is important. The suicide threat. You know what? If we don't get back together, I'm going to kill myself. I can't live without you. I'm sorry. This happens all the time. You may think I'm being facetious, but it really happens all the time. Don't fall for that. And maybe even if it is serious, if that person, if you know him or her and they're threatening to kill themselves, and if it's that serious, once again, they need help. You got to break them out of this cycle, and that means getting the courts involved, getting the police involved, because they need some type of help. Just you forgiving them and letting them go back through this cycle is not going to help them. You got to help them break that cycle. You got to get me involved. You got to get the courts involved. All right. The victims. What are the victims doing during this honeymoon phase? All right. First thing they do, they stay. It's like, okay, you know what? I'm going to forgive you. I'm going to take you back. I know you did X, Y, and Z. I know you put your hands on me, but I love you. I don't want to be with anybody else. I don't want to start all over again. All of those are poor excuses for you to allow somebody to abuse you. Bottom line is, if you love yourself, you'll be willing to protect yourself, and that often means you got to get out that relationship. But it's hard, right? Because nobody wants to be alone, right? Nobody wants to be alone. But if you are in an abusive relationship where somebody's beating on you or showing your kids that you are not worth anything and they don't care about you, is that a relationship that you want to be in, or is it better to be alone? That's something that you really got to think about as a victim. I'm telling all my sisters, I'm telling my daughters, I'm telling my brothers out there, whatever you can, be alone. Because being in an abusive relationship, you are alone. You're isolated. You can't call your friends. You can't talk freely about what's going on in your life. You might as well move on. Don't settle for that. All right, what else do victims do in this stage? They take the guy back or the woman back. They see hope. Oh my God, you know what? I want to be happy, so I believe that they're going to be okay. And I'm going to go over this stuff again, but I'm going to keep it shorter on this first one. Here's the thing that happens all the time. They want to stop legal action, right? So they don't want to press charges anymore. They don't want the court involved anymore. I can understand that, because if you care about somebody, you're concerned about them getting caught up in the legal matrix, right? That's what I call it. But the bottom line is, if you really love that person, you're going to get them help. You're going to help them break that cycle. And that means you got to get the courts involved, because as much as we say, oh, baby, don't worry, I'm going to go to counseling. I got this under control. I'm going to handle it. It's an addiction. Putting your hands on somebody is an addiction because it's not normal. If you do it all the time and it's not normal, that's something that you need help with breaking the cycle. Everybody say they can do it on their own, but chances are you can't. All right, let me get to a couple of comments, and then if there are a couple of questions, I know I have a couple of different streams going here. All right, this is important. So there was a guy, I put a post on Instagram today of a video of a domestic violence situation, and this person commented on my page, interesting. He said, he was in my court 9 years ago. His wife lied on him. I, Judge Dawson, believed everything the woman said, and I put him through all these classes and all that stuff. They end up, I'm assuming this part, they end up getting a divorce. She was cheating on him, and the persons that she was cheating with, he got domestic violence charges against him, and the cycle continued. So, what does that mean? If you are in a relationship with somebody that is lying on you about a domestic violence situation, the moment you get caught up in this legal matrix, that should be the last day that you're in that relationship. Let me say that again in case you didn't hear me. If you are in a relationship with somebody that lied on you and got charges put on you, that should be the last day that you are in that relationship. Flat out. And let me tell you the other part about it. I hate to say it. Maybe you saw that movie, Martin Lawrence, Thin Line Between Love and Hate. I'm gonna assume that stuff is true, right? That really can happen. But the problem that you face as men and women is, I'm a judge. I'm sitting there. I'm supposed to weigh the evidence presented. So if I have a man or a woman, and this goes for domestic violence, assault, whatever you may be involved in. If I have a victim sitting in front of me with black eyes and crying and talking about a history of abuse, what am I supposed to believe? What would a jury believe? I mean, that's pretty good evidence, right? But let's say you got a psycho woman or a psycho man in your life. That needs to be the last day that you are involved with that person because you got played. Flat out. I mean, I can't call it no other way. So for that young man that commented on my page that 9 years ago he was in a relationship with a woman that lied through her teeth, did it again to another man, unfortunately, he was involved with a good actress. And she played him and she played me. And sometimes that's going to happen. But for men and women that's in that situation, that should be the last day that you're in that relationship with that person. And now you come out a little smarter. So maybe you had to go to anger management. Maybe you spent some time in jail because they called the police. But guess what? Now you know some red flags. So as soon as you see a woman or a man acting like X, Y, and Z, it's time for you to roll. So keep that in mind. All right, the next one. My son is in jail for X, Y, and Z. I know what he did was wrong, but he's not that bad. I hear it all the time. We love our women, right? And mamas, they love their sons. I mean, sometimes, we had that situation. So I'm not really moved by a mom's love for her son because that happens all the time. I mean, I love my kids. And we always see the best in our kids. But if your son is beating up a woman, we got to get him out that cycle. And maybe going through the court proceedings, maybe going to jail, whatever the case may be, that's how it is. But I get that comment all the time. My son is not that bad, or my daughter's not that bad. I know she cut up his clothes. Hey, if she committed domestic violence, she may need to pay the price. Flat out. All right. The other one. I don't want nothing to happen to my mate. I'm not sure if I should have called the police. Here's the deal. If you are in a situation where somebody is putting your safety in jeopardy, you have to call the police because you don't know how far it's going to go. Think about it. You at this end. Person is showing you weapons. Person is hitting on you, grabbing you, shaking you, tearing things up in the house. The best bet is to call police so that he can calm down or they can remove him from the house. And then if he's not that bad of a person or she's not that bad of a person, maybe we'll make it through this situation without them having to do jail time. Maybe they'll do some anger management, get some good skills. But the bottom line is you want to call the police when the domestic violence gets to that level. Don't worry about, you don't want anything to happen to them because that's the consequence, right? We all know that every action has a reaction or a consequence. Now, a domestic violence conviction doesn't have to ruin somebody's life, but it's something that you got to go through. All right, so I had another question that came through about the kids, but I think I addressed that appropriately when I said that, look, we all know that we don't want, kids growing up thinking that domestic violence is okay. As a mother, it is your primary obligation to protect your kids. I don't care if your kid is 2 years old or 21 years old. If your daughter or your son is witnessing domestic violence in your house and you don't do anything about it as a woman or a man, you are victimizing that kid. And I can say that when I'm in my bag and I'm preaching and I'm doing my workshops. Now, if you called me one-on-one as a friend, of course I'm not going to put you down like that. But in this environment, I can just tell it to you how it is. If you are allowing your kid to witness a man or a woman physically, mentally, or verbally abusing you, then you are also victimizing your kid. Flat out. Hold on 1 second, let me see. All right, so I am about to get ready to conclude. I want to make sure I don't have any other questions. I think I got just a lot of great people who are watching, and I appreciate that. Of course, if you have any questions, for those of you who are in my court program, this is the first time we're tuning in live. I appreciate that. First of all, what it says to me about you is that, you know, whatever you are in my court for, it doesn't define you at all. Just the fact that you are taking your time, you know, you could have stayed at home and played the whole coronavirus, internet wasn't working, something like that. So I really appreciate you. I don't think anything ill of you based on what you've dealt with. So thank you. I'm going to see you all next week. I see my absolute favorite young lady tuned in. Hopefully she knows who she is. I'm so proud of her. My brothers that are tuning in, I'm proud of you too. We're going to keep this going. So next Monday at 5:30, because for court it's becoming an obligation since we don't have the classes. So make sure you tune in, and either we'll be talking about this or some other topic that can just bring us more leadership skills, all right? So for those who are tuned in from court, we can tune out. For those on any other platform, if there are any questions that you have, everybody, you go to my website, JudgeDawson.com. You can send me questions. You can send me emails. That way we can communicate. And anything that you want to talk about next week, I'll be willing to do it. Other than that, continue to be the best you can be. Continue to be cycle breakers. You know that's my motto. And I'll see you next time. All right? Take care. All right. So I'm logging out of my court program. I know I have some of my Instagram followers tuned in live. Hopefully you've enjoyed this, but most importantly, you got to share it with somebody. Most people we know, right here. Most people exist in denial. Most people want to post on Instagram how they're living their best life, how everything is fine. You know, they do their makeup, put on the best clothes, buy those new kicks and all that stuff. But nobody wants to talk about the silent suffering of domestic violence. And that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to call it like it is. So share this video with somebody. Maybe it'll be on my website, but at least it'll be up here for 24 hours. If you care about somebody and you know they're going through it, check it out. Other than that, it's time for me to go. You take care.